Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. She's the best-selling author of popular fiction titles showcasing the Australian landscape, along with the challenges faced by rural and remote communities. A rural midwife for over 30 years herself and a passionate advocate and educator for her profession, Fiona McArthur has penned 45 novels and sold millions of books, the latest of which is The Desert Midwife, published by Penguin Random House. Welcome to Talking Aussie Books, Fiona.
Good morning, Claudine.
Wow, more than 30 years as a rural midwife. You would have faced some interesting medical and social situations in that time. Was there one particular moment in your career that you could say was the precipitating factor in terms of your writing?
You know what? I think it was more along the lines of providing service in a setting that was a little bit conservative. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of where I started writing. So the first book I ever sold was one about sort of this really alternate midwife and this conservative doctor. So and the last one I wrote as I left after the 33 years was about water birth. So it was all these social things that I wanted to help the women be able to have the same sort of options that women in the city have.
The Desert Midwife, as I said just before we started recording, it embarrassingly was the first of your novels I've read, and I was completely enthralled by Ava's story. It reminded me of that Australian TV series, The Flying Doctors, in the mid to late 80s and 90s. And it definitely gave me a strong sense of the kind of courage and stoicism living in the outback entails. Before we go any further in terms of talking about The Desert Midwife, can you give my listeners a rundown about the book?
The book. Okay, so it started, I wrote a non-fiction book called Aussie Midwives. Aussie Midwives was 19 Australian midwives stories, real names, real people. And it was a little bit of a book of the heart. And one of the midwives that I interviewed for Aussie Midwives was a woman who worked between Alice Springs and Katherine. And that was her Monday to Friday job. So she left Alice on a Monday and she came back on a Friday, and she just drove and she visited communities and she visited stations. And it was just that concept I felt was really heroic. And it was also like she got to meet these women, some of these really isolated young women who had to leave their families, get on a bus and come in to have a baby. She'd meet them again in Alice if that was her on week for birthing. So it was just like, oh, wow, that's a really good platform for this next book. And then I thought about what sort of needs does that woman have for herself to carry on and do all these things, and what's her background. And she'd have this really good support network of family, I would assume. So this was my building up of the family. And then I'd always had this story that I wanted to write about a really fast relationship, because you haven't read any of my other books, but I'm actually a sweet writer. So I'm always closing the bedroom door. So it was quite challenging for me to have them have this intense relationship in a week and then him forget. So it was just, it was a really great melding of lots of fun ideas. So, I'm really, really happy with it, very proud of it. Love all the Indigenous content. It's all been cleared, and got to speak to some amazing people and midwives who'd worked out there. And, so it was just a collection of all the things that I want to write about, that I love to write about.
Indeed. Now, Ava was a delightful character, and I loved that despite still grieving her own loss, she brings such compassion and passion to her role as a midwife. It's not just a job for her. No. So I wanted to ask you, in your experience, do you think this is crucial to longevity in this profession, or indeed any work in rural and remote communities?
Yeah, well, even and in the city as well. Any midwife needs to really have that empathy, that caring, that mothering towards the person they're looking after. And that gives you joy tenfold, whether it's a really straightforward birth, which are just like the icing on the cake, or a really difficult long labour that, you sort of feel like, oh, can I have done anything different? And the woman's looking at you thinking, thank God you stayed with me, So midwifery itself requires that connection and to stay connected with a woman for the duration of the labour at least, So, I think rural and remote women, yes, they don't have the coming home and having someone visit like people do in the city. Once you leave the hospital, you tend to be, that's it. So there needs to be a really good connection there too.
Yeah, it's such a relationship of trust, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah, and people that you might not remember their names, which is terrible, but you do remember their faces, and you do remember that you shared something pretty darn incredible. And I just, I feel blessed every day for the job that I was able to do, and happy and sad outcomes. You know, you are honoured to. I'm honoured to be there. It's just a wonderful profession.
Indeed. Now, there's a definite city versus outback divide in this book.
Yeah.
Ava and her family come from the land and they can't fathom life in the city. And with all the hardships and challenges rural and remote living poses, what is it do you think draws people to this kind of lifestyle?
Oh, family. I think it's family or loved ones, or you have to have that network, and then of course the love of the land and the challenge and the little wins and the standing out there and just looking at the sky and just looking at the horizon that's so far away, the colour of the rocks. I mean, I visited somebody in Broken Hill, and we went up at sunrise onto the top of a ridge, and you know, it was desolate, but it was glorious, and there was all these crystallized rocks poking out like a dinosaur's back along the top of these ridges. And I mean, I don't know what the sheep ate, but I was absolutely rapt by how gorgeous it all was. So yeah, I think deep love of the land, good strong family, and just meeting challenges and being resourceful.
Yeah. I wanted to delve into some of the themes of this novel. You touch on some very topical issues, not the least of which is drought and its effects on the mental health of those who live off the land. I'm guessing that in your line of work, this is something you would have seen a great deal of.
I haven't seen a great deal of it. I've read a lot about it. It was a watershed for me when I did go to Broken Hill and talk to the woman out there at Broken Hill on Mount Gibbs Station, and just watching her feeds on Facebook, and a couple of years ago when they got the rain, seeing her standing under a pipe going into the dam just with this look of joy on her face. And then, 2 years later, seeing him round up the last of the sheep and pop them on the, and it was just, that's a big, amazing watershed for me. Where I live is it's 200 acres. It's near the near the ocean. We have swamp, and it goes under, it floods so much that you can paddle your kayaks over the fences, that keep the cows in. And the rest of the time it's, brown dry, but it's still a place that always gets a little bit of rain. So even though I'm on tank water, I don't have that fear or direness that they have in the outback, but I admire them so much.
Yeah. The statistics on suicide rates in Australia's farming community are horrific, with men most at risk. Not everyone is as lucky as Ava's brother Jock. Not only is economic malaise a factor in depression, but loneliness of life out on a farm. What do you think can be done to help turn the tide on these statistics?
I'm loving reading about these guys that have actually felt that way and come out of it from outback. There was a really beautiful article 2 days ago about someone, well, it was tragic but beautiful, someone selling their station after all these years, and again it was the Broken Hill area, but about meeting somebody who'd been in the same spot and saying, hey, look, you can't do more than what your mother nature lets you do, but your family and you are really important, and just not being alone. I think these guys just need to know they're not alone and that people really do care, and it's not their fault. Nature is nature.
That scene in the book, and I don't want to give away any spoilers for those who haven't read it, but there is a scene in the book that, is quite heart-wrenching. And I wondered, how did you get into that headspace to write that scene? Did you speak to people who'd obviously been touched by?
No. And I could have, because my husband was a paramedic for 30 years, but I certainly didn't want to bring anything up to him.
Yes.
So no, but then I get into the headspace of all my characters. So, I'm Ava, or I'm Zach, or I'm Hannah, or I'm, Jock. It's just, I really see it. They talk to me, and that's the joy of writing. It doesn't happen all the time. A lot of the time it's bum on seat and just pushing forward. But then those moments happen that just blow you away, and you're like, oh my goodness, best job in the world, love it. What happened to that 3 hours? It's just gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, just losing yourself in the character and letting the characters do the journey.
Look, I think your novel does a brilliant job of showing just how devastating suicide can be, particularly the impact on other family members. And with the characters that you've portrayed in this book, there's a delicate balance between
Yes.
all the characters, that sort of interdependency of relationship between them, and they're all, and that love and that bond. It was a remarkable read in that respect, and I really loved it.
Thank you.
So Ava's work with the Anangu people and her understanding of their connection with the land is heartwarming, to say the least. Can you describe what experience or research you did to draw on for this aspect of your story?
Yeah. So I've been out to Uluru several times, and one time I went out just to do more of a meditational sort of trip. I used to work for a company that was doing volunteer teaching for midwives and doctors remotely. So one of the times we went to Alice Springs. So that was the first time I went. I went with my middle child, who was a diesel mechanic, luckily, because we got a flat tire on the way out the back of Kings Canyon. So it was a long way from Alice to Uluru. Loved it, just loved it. Went back later with my husband again, and yeah, so there was that there, and that was a lot of the descriptions, because I really they just remained so magical in my mind. Lots of reading, also some discussions. There's a group called the Arairi Titja, which is a digital online. It's for the language. So there was some ladies that I spoke to there, because myself and my publisher, of course, were very concerned that we kept everything sensitive and that the storytelling was believable and that it was, correct and respectful. So I'm really, really proud of that we had this communication with all these people. And I've been, birthing with Indigenous women for a long time, because I live in Kempsey, and we have a lovely Indigenous group of people here. And these women, they're just amazing. Their family is so strong, So I wanted to portray that as well.
Obviously, as you've said, and you understood that cultural sensitivity was really important, particularly when you're talking about the Indigenous community. But I loved that I could learn about their beliefs and practices as a feature of this book. I really, really enjoyed learning about them, particularly through the young pregnant Indigenous girl, Jessamine.
Yes, yes.
And I wondered, was it a baptism of fire for you in terms of learning the ways of the Anangu people, or whatever Indigenous community you happen to be working with in your role as a midwife? Or did you have to have someone guide you through all of that?
So because it was a part of the community in Kempsey, so 25% of our babies are Indigenous. So you get to make friends, you get to re-meet families, you would meet the same auntie with different grandchildren or nieces, so that was just a lovely role, oh, you were here when so and so, and so that was a really, really helpful thing, I think, as far as my original connection. But with Central Australia, that was just visiting, reading, and then connecting by email to people who could actually say. I will tell you a little funny story, though. There was a scene in the book where I had a child hurt himself with his mother walking along a road. That was originally set in a community. And the elders came back to me and said, could you please set it out of the community so we don't draw bad vibes into the community and another child might hurt themselves.
Oh, okay.
So wasn't that fascinating? Yeah. And I was like, thank goodness you've told me this, because, I don't want you to feel that way.
Absolutely.
So we moved the scene.
So obviously you spent time up in Uluru and Yara in the Red Centre.
And Canyon. And
I mean, and the sense of place that I got from reading the book was incredible. And so, naturally I wanted to start looking up some of those places that you mentioned.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, yes, I really want to go there.
Yes.
And that's my kind of armchair travel. I love doing that, and then being inspired to go and visit places that I read about. But in so doing at the moment, I was horrified to learn of the stampede of sorts that's currently occurring at Uluru, where people are clamouring for that final opportunity to climb the rock before it closes to the public permanently this coming October. So I wondered, did you have an opinion on whether people should be able to climb Uluru?
I read about all that the other day, and I actually, if you look in the book, you'll actually see where Ava says, I would feel honoured if someone wanted to show me a sacred place, but I don't feel the need to climb, because, I don't want to climb Notre Dame, even when it's burnt. But, I think that was sort of the way I got my little message across.
Yeah. There was one picture, I think I even saw it on the news. There was literally a conga line of people.
Yeah, but I don't see that that's much different to 20 years ago when there was one or two. I think that times are changing and everybody has to change with the times.
Indeed.
And the real thing was that it does really upset the Indigenous community there if somebody's hurt. That's their sacred place, and it does hurt them when someone gets injured or is killed. And that's, they're pretty amazing the way they've just opened up this area and share all these knowledge and amazing stuff that they've got out there. It's just, it's pretty incredible.
Now, I love that Ava came from a line of incredibly strong women and that it was her grandmother, Mim, who was instrumental in trying to diversify their income stream on Setabili by setting up these eco-tourist sheds on the property. So do you think that this is key to drought survival for farms across Australia now?
Well, I'd actually read about, so all these little things tend to come from something that I'd read about, a farm stay that did all those things, and it actually dressed the animals and it did all these experiences that people go through, and the little welded mailboxes all came from when I visited Kim out at Mount Gipp Station at Broken Hill, and I've put it in 2 books now because I just love this little thing. If you look on my Homestead Girls Facebook site, there's a little video of that tiny little homestead with the windmill turning around in the wind. It's just incredible. I love it.
Brilliant.
But yes, I think that diversity is probably the key.
Yeah. Now, we can't not mention the gorgeous Dr. Zach, with whom Ava falls head over heels in love with. He was an interesting character with his own tragic past. How much of his own healing comes from spending time on Setabili Station, being grounded to the land?
I think the family as well, the warmth of the family is really important to his healing. And Ava not being demanding, just being the amazing person that she is. And I think just finding himself, and I mean, he's an extremely worthy guy. He just, had an accident and he's had a tough time and it just triggered the wrong things. And, I think that they'll be very happy together.
Indeed, I think they were lucky to find one another. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, Fiona, you've just retired from your role as a clinical midwifery educator. Do you think you'll ever run out of inspiration for your stories now that you're not in the front line, so to speak?
It's really interesting. I don't think so. I've got lots and lots of stories, but I also subscribe and are a member of the Australian Midwifery Association, so the Australian College of Midwives. Mm-hmm. So they have a monthly mag which has amazing stories from on-the-ground midwives, and I think that that's going to be a big resource for me. I know lots of midwives, we connect, and I think it'll be fine. I think that now I've got time to write more. It's so much easier without juggling all the balls of work and deadlines and then promotion and then all these other things. And I mean, I'm emergency nanny as well. I've got 9 grandchildren.
God love you.
So sometimes we do have emergencies and nanny needs to go, and family is really important. So it's lovely. I had the best job in the world with midwifery. I've retired now and I've moved on to looking at it from a different angle.
Speaking of juggling, I was fascinated to learn that you raised 5 children and began writing while you were still relatively young. So how is it that you managed to be when they were still relatively young, not you? How is it that you managed to be so prolific with your writing and work at the same time?
Yeah, so basically I'm an early morning writer. So this morning I was up probably 4:45 and I'd done my writing by 6. When the kids were little, they didn't get up usually before 6. So I used to write between 4 and 6. And that actually works for me. It works really well for me. If I don't write in the mornings, I feel really guilty for the rest of the day. So you may as well get the flipping thing out of the road and then you can get on with your life. Of course, you have days where you have big writing days, but most of the time I just plod along on my 500 or so words a day, and that'll give me a book a year, a small book a year, and a rewritten book a year. So, it suits me very, very well. And I would say that to anybody who wants to write. I would say just stop being daunted about, how much you're going to write and how will I ever finish a book. Just do your 500 words a day. I found I needed to go from the beginning to the end, and then I could fix the beginning. It's that whole getting stuck on these 3 chapters and polishing and polishing and polishing that wastes so much time. I wasted 10 years. So my big theme is 500 words a day, every day, till you get to the end, and then you get to play with it. Don't play with it before then.
That's excellent advice. And I think, as I mentioned before we started recording, that I have a lot of aspiring and emerging writers that listen to this podcast, me included. Obviously, I'm in that category. And it's always interesting for me to learn about different ways that authors attack goals. I hear a lot of people who are so daunted by the prospect of finishing.
Yeah, and other people reading it. But you've got to finish it before they can read it.
Indeed. And you can't fix anything if it's not on the page.
That's right. Absolutely. You can fix a bad page. You can't fix a blank one.
So, Fiona, what's next? Are you working on another novel at the moment?
Yes, I'm 30,000 in.
Oh, wow.
It's due in October. It's due in October. But I want to finish for September so I can sit for a couple of weeks and I can fiddle with it. And it's a story out back again. So it's a young woman who returns to a town that wasn't really kind to her in the past. But, and it's also got a few social issues in it, a little bit on the women's housing, because women are being homeless and stuff like that. And it was just, I had all these little minor themes and things kept popping into me. You keep running across an article in Women's Weekly. I was like, oh, my goodness, there's a whole article on it. And then you read something else and it's like, oh, my goodness, that was what I was.
Yeah.
So it's just go with the flow, let it happen. And I'll just go forward. I love it. I actually go away, though. I go away 3 weeks a year for 1 week and just stay by myself and write. And that's always a really nice time.
Oh, gosh, I'd love to do that.
I know. It's so good.
Just escape the world and just sit with your computer and write. Sounds idyllic. Yes. So, Fiona, are you touring for the Desert Midwife?
I've done some bits and pieces. I'm going to, because I'm halfway between Sydney and Brisbane, I can't really do the cities easily. So I told my publicist I would go 2 to 2.5 hours around from where I was. So I'm doing Taree and Armidale and Coffs Harbour and Grafton. And then I've been doing some travelling with Jay Ford. We went up to Winton to the Outback Writers Festival at Winton, which was a 4,600 kilometre trek.
Gosh.
In the car, which was absolutely fun. My husband loved it. So we've done a couple of sort of things like that. But Jay and I are going up to Brisbane. We've got 3 events up at Gatton and Laidley and Runaway Bay. And then we're flying to Melbourne for our conference, for the Romance Writers of Australia conference.
Oh, I'll see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Please
come
exciting. Yeah. No, I look, I'm actually, can I say, the only person in Australia who's been to every single conference since it started.
I'm sure that's not true.
It's actually true.
Oh, no.
There was 2 of us and 1 lady went away last year. But you have to full kudos to my husband because I wasn't published for the first 10 years. And I did have all these little kids and I used to buzz off. So keep going to conference, that's all I can say.
Well, this will be my first and I'm terribly excited about going.
Excellent. My husband actually found the first one in the Sydney Morning Herald. And he said, you'd probably really like this. You've always said you wanted to write a Mills and Boon. And I had probably only had 4 kids then. I didn't have the 5. And none of them were at school. And so Mum had to come with me and she went to her sister's at the Central Coast and I went off down to Sydney. And it was just incredible to meet these people who were so generous, just so open and inspiring, but really excited for us, for people who wanted to do it. Yeah. So it was, so I went the next year as well. And then I actually ended up going every year. So my family know that in August, Mum's away, at least for a week. It used to be a day, then it was 2, and now it's 5. So, it's a fun thing. And eventually you get to go to RW America just for the wow factor of, instead of, 400 people, there's 2,500.
Oh, my Lord, yeah.
And that's pretty crazy. And all my friends are just flying off now to go to that for next week. So, and I'm going off to New Zealand, to the Romance Rise of New Zealand conference, because they actually finalled me in the Koru, which is really exciting.
Oh, that's very exciting. Yeah,
So,
awesome.
yeah.
So, Fiona, if listeners wanted to connect with you, how could they do that?
So FionaMcArthurAuthor.com is the webpage, and it's got a connection page. Fiona McArthur Author on Facebook. Fee Catches Baby on Twitter.
Oh, cool.
I don't know whether I have to change that, now that I don't catch babies anymore. But, I do in my book, so I think that counts. I think I can stay Fee Catches Baby at Twitter.
Indeed. Yeah.
And the same thing for Instagram, Fiona McArthur Author. So, yeah, I'm out there.
That's brilliant. Fiona, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today. It was an absolute pleasure to chat to you.
Yeah, you too, Claudine.
Now, listeners, a copy of this book is up for grabs, courtesy of Penguin Random House. Do yourself a favour and don't pass up the chance to get your hands on this uplifting and heartwarming novel. If you want to be in the draw to win, you know what to do. Head over to my Instagram or Facebook account and follow the prompts to win. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.